popular. And the first thing to mention are the cyclists in this city. There are so many people on bikes. And most of the time, these are students, of course, with not much of a regard for tourists in general. They've often got headphones in, rushing to get to seminars and lectures, that sort of thing. It shouldn't be a problem. Of course, we're not going to be crossing too many busy roads, but do just watch out for cyclists whenever we're walking around.
Okay.
The other thing to mention is that people usually have very different ideas of what to expect when they first arrive here in Oxford. We get a lot of Harry Potter fans, as you might imagine. Most of the shops in Oxford are now flogging Harry Potter merchandise as a consequence of the connection between the films and this city. People often expect something out of Harry Potter. Certainly people usually expect to come and see the University of Oxford, so to say, a campus of some sort, perhaps a main big building, a castle maybe. People are often not aware of the fact that the University of Oxford is collegiate, as it's known, so it's spread pretty evenly across the entire city, really. Now, have you heard of this collegiate system? Heard of any of the colleges of Oxford, perhaps?
Magdalen College.
Not so, sorry?
It's Magdalen?
Magdalen College, yes, yeah, there you go. But that's exactly, Magdalen College is one of the famous ones, it's absolutely right. So there are 38 colleges in the city of Oxford. There's 38 colleges, all make up the university as we know it. And what that means is that there isn't really a University of Oxford in the way that most people expect there to be. To give you an idea about these colleges, we're going to be going inside Balliol in just a moment. Each of them have their own facilities, their own sports teams, their own dining halls, for example, their own chapels, their own everything, really. Rather than being parts of a larger university, more simply, they're really like miniature universities in and of themselves, really. They all have their own accommodation, quite importantly. Typically, the students of each of the colleges will sleep and eat and live within the grounds of their particular college. If you were to be accepted into the University of Oxford to complete a full-time degree of some sort, you will always be ascribed a particular college. And your college really becomes your home, your university, so to say, really, within the wider University of Oxford. So, for example, if you're accepted into Balliol College here, you will find you're going to spend the bulk of your time in and around Balliol. Certainly for your first year, you'll sleep inside the college. It's where you make all your friends, where you play your sports. If you're a chorister, it's where you sing. It's where you do everything, really. You will tend to have your lectures and a few of your seminars, a few of your tutorials outside of the college, depending on what you're studying. We'll come to this a little bit later. It's quite a complicated system, to be honest. It takes quite a while to get your head around it. But all within the city. Balliol College. Now, before we come on to Balliol, so I've just had a very good question as to which subject you would study here at Balliol College. 38 colleges, 37 of those colleges are open to students. There's one that isn't, we'll be talking about that one later. Within these colleges you can study typically around about 20 subjects. So none of the colleges really have much of an association with any subject in particular. The reason colleges rarely want to associate themselves with any one subject is due to the fact that that association would then suggest that they wouldn't be quite so good at the other subjects that they offer. And so Balliol, for example, there are like 3 Prime Ministers of Great Britain were educated here at Balliol. And so as a consequence, you'd think there might be a connection with Balliol and politics. Balliol are very keen to keep that connection at arm's length because they don't want people to think that actually coming to Balliol to study PPE, for example, would be a bad idea because politics would be the subject you want to study. Not the case at all.
Which Prime Ministers?
So Herbert Asquith, Edward Macmillan, Harold Macmillan and Ted Dominion. Now, Balliol has got a pretty long list of impressive alumni, actually. This place is considered to be the oldest college at the university. There are a few other colleges that dispute that claim, but this place was founded back in 1263. So it's certainly one of the oldest colleges. It was founded by a guy called John de Balliol, who was a very wealthy man. His brother who actually became the King of Scotland. His family initially hailed from northern France. Very, very wealthy family. And Mr de Balliol had a big argument with the then Bishop of Durham back in the 1250s. The Bishop of Durham at the time, one of the most powerful men in the country. And the two men had this big dispute, and John de Balliol, in sort of penance for this argument, he decided to found this place and fund a number of monks to come and study here. And he funded them the whole way through their studies. Now, yeah, as I say, the Balliol College has been here for an awful long time. Most of the buildings that you see, however, don't date back to anywhere near the 13th century. They were considered to be quite a forward-thinking college here, and back in the 18th century they decided to tear down most of the original architecture here and rebuild it with what they considered to look like sort of New Age, neo-architecture, which is a bit of a shame really, but it gives itself quite an interesting look here in Balliol. So a number of things that the Balliol College is famous for. Of course, you've got the 3 Prime Ministers, the fact that it's the oldest college as well. The thing that the college is most popular for in Oxford, though, is without doubt its tortoise. Now, you might have heard of the tortoise races at University of Oxford, perhaps. Not seeing many. But, okay, well, so there is Tortuga. There aren't many. There's 3 languages I know that word, and it's quite lucky.
Tortoise or torture? Or
Oh, tortoise! No. There was a little bit of that here as well, actually. We'll come to that in a little while. No, the tortoise racing, mate, much more enjoyable. So now a lot of colleges have tortoises here, actually, but Balliol kicked this tradition off. It was about 60 years ago now. They decided to adopt a college tortoise, essentially a mascot for the place, and they named her after an old Marxist theorist called Rosa Luxemburg. You might have heard of Rosa Luxemburg, big heroine in the city of Oxford, and so the students here decided to name their little tortoise after this old German Marxist. Now, Rosa became very popular in the city. In fact, sorry guys, you want to just tuck me up? We'll keep that apart for a little bit. Rosa became very popular in the city, as you might imagine, and people would come from all over to visit her. They kept her over in the porter's lodge that we just walked past, but she would roam the grounds of the college really quite freely, and she was a big, like, citywide celebrity, as you might imagine. Within a decade, several other colleges had decided that they quite liked this idea, and they too had purchased little college tortoises, and all of a sudden there were 12 tortoises in the centre of the city of Oxford. Now, of course, you probably won't know this as we haven't spoken about it yet, but there are lots of very fierce rivalries between these colleges at Oxford. Of course, they've typically been here for a very long time, and as we mentioned a moment ago, they're all very close together. Trinity College, for example, was founded in 1555, and so these two colleges have been right on each other's doorsteps ever since that time. Fierce rivalries have developed, and over the course of the past almost 1,000 years, lots of students have actually been murdered as a consequence of these rivalries. And so it was quite fortunate in the it's quite fortunate in the 20th century that all of a sudden it's been quite a dangerous place to live actually for most of its history. Here we are though, 20th century, we've got a few tortoises instead who can really we can sort of channel our rivalries through. So they decided to hold an annual tortoise race. Now this race still takes place every year to this day, typically over at Corpus Christi College, which we may well be seeing later, one of the smaller colleges in the city. And what it essentially involves is, in the front quad of Corpus Christi, they will lay out a large ring of lettuce, big ring of salad leaves essentially. The tortoises are all placed in this, if you imagine the rings around about 10 metres in diameter, they're quite a big ring. Tortoises placed in the middle, generally they're wearing little jerseys, you might imagine, or even just chalk on their shells, they're all distinguishable. Lots of drunk students around chanting and singing and cheering. Tortoises in the middle, not got a clue what's going on obviously, but somebody will blow a whistle and the race will begin. And it's mayhem, people getting really excited, it's a wonderful, wonderful spectacle. As you might imagine though, the race begins and the tortoises don't do anything for quite a long time actually. They've got no idea where they are or really the importance of this event. And well, I don't suppose any of you could guess how long it might take a tortoise to walk. About 5 metres.
5 meters.
About 5 metres, yeah. Now these are, I mean, it's a bit of a weird question to ask, I guess. No one putting their hand up. Well, the world record was actually set by Rosa Luxemburg back in 2004. It was an astonishing day for the little tortoise. She smashed the previous world record, setting a time of 3 hours and 11 minutes. Yeah. Now, it's worth bearing in mind these tortoises have really fed exceptionally well. These colleges are all very, very wealthy, and the tortoises often take pride of place somewhere in the college. Of course, a bit of stale lettuce, not much to get them moving, I suppose. But that's all part of the idea. You'd hate for the tortoises to complete the race in some sort of exciting time, because then the event would be over before you know it.
Where are the tortoises kept?
Well, in all the various colleges. So now there are only 6 at the moment. Well, we're going to come to what happened to Rosa. Unfortunately, she made a bit of a mysterious ending, actually. So let's come to that. So Rosa, unbelievable achievement. People can't believe what they've seen, obviously. Rosa's tucking into her salad leaves. Somebody picks her up, starts chanting her name, and the Balliol students start walking back from Corpus Christi, about a 10-minute walk away to the gates of Balliol with their tortoise, chanting and singing. It's a nice Saturday in May, lovely sunny day, and everyone's celebrating. Rosa's having a wonderful time, as you might imagine. The Balliol students get back to the door of the college, the one that we've just walked through, and at that point realised that they no longer had Rosa. She had just sort of disappeared. Nobody was quite sure what had happened to her. Lots of theories as to what happened. The thinking was that they'd lost track of her. Everybody's celebrating, more than likely, not many thousands, but certainly thousands of students out celebrating. More than likely she's been taken off to some after party, you might imagine. Nothing to be concerned about. Surely she'll rock back up at the gates of the college. But she didn't. days and weeks go by, still no sign of poor little Rosa, and here we are with, well, 15 years later now, and still nobody has any idea what happened to the little tortoise. She just vanished. Now, various theories, as I say, have been suggested since her disappearance. The most popular one is that the rivals of Balliol College over at Trinity most likely has something to do with Rosa's disappearance. Now, the suggestion is that they kidnapped her and murdered her. There's a bit of a legend that they actually emptied out her shell and still use it as a sort of ceremonial goblet in the little common room. Nobody knows if that's true, and of course we like to think not, but but very possible, very possible. You might have heard that Harry Potter was filmed in Oxford, one of the dining halls here. Completely untrue, actually. There's Christchurch College, which has a dining hall that looks, again, very similar to this one. Slightly larger, and nowadays has many more portraits in the room. There was one scene of Harry Potter filmed in Christchurch. They used some stairs just outside the dining hall, actually. And so ever since the film came out, they've been saying, Harry Potter was filmed here. And people have been flocking in their hundreds of thousands from all around the world to come and see where they think Harry Potter was filmed. And they go in and see the dining hall and think, fantastic, this is where it all happened. But as I say, 38 of these colleges in the city, and none of them were used in the Harry Potter films, unfortunately. However, when you first arrive in Oxford, regardless of the degree that you're studying, when you first arrive, you will typically live in college. So depending on the college that you are at, some are much older, some are much newer, so the accommodation can vary enormously. Balliol is quite unique in that it offers rooms to every single one of its students. And so typically, if you're a student at Balliol College, you will live here for the duration of your undergraduate or postgraduate degree. Most students at most colleges will live in college for their first year and then are very happy to get out for the second year, due to the fact that typically accommodation, for various reasons, can be a little uncomfortable to live in. As you might imagine, your first experience here at Oxford is like living in Hogwarts in a castle of some sort. It's just overwhelming. It's this incredible experience. The Wi-Fi is abysmal in all of these accommodation rooms. It gets very cold in the winter, very hot in the summer. You may only have one plug socket. The biggest issue really is that for vacations, for VACs, you have to move out of your room when you live in college. And so that means for every holiday, every half term, every main holiday, you have to vacate, move everything out, because these colleges will then, over the course of typically only the longer holidays, but a lot of the time over half terms as well, will essentially rent themselves out as conference centres, really. And so you'll have big conferences, symposiums, for whatever reason, weddings even, that sort of thing, that will need you to use these rooms. And so as a consequence, you're moving in and out constantly when you live in college. So it's much cheaper to live in college, it's heavily subsidised, you get to come and eat in a dining hall like this, but for various reasons, after a year of it, people typically are happy to move out. However, when you're living in college, you come and eat in a dining hall like this for every meal of the day. So breakfast, lunch and dinner. Breakfast and lunch typically in 4, as you might imagine. You can come normally over an hour-long window and help yourself, really. There will be a buffet at one end. And Balliol is actually quite unusual. It's got a button, and so you just grab a tray and go and help yourself to the food there. But Harris and Manchester rivals, they have young boys and girls, normally from local schools in Oxford, who come and act as waiters and waitresses, which is a bit weird to get used to. It's very nice. Yeah, so breakfast, lunch, and every day there will be an informal dinner as well. And that's, as it says in the tin, pretty standard. Food's generally pretty good. You've got chefs in each time as well.
But you have to pay separately.
So you normally, you have to pay a small fee, which is a fee that you pay to cover the cost of your accommodation and your food whilst you're living. So yeah, it does cost a bit. Normally around about £2 per meal. So it's not a lot. So as I said, informal meals every day. You will then, depending on the college, have 1 to 3 formal dinners a week as well. Formal dinners are entirely optional. They do cost a little bit more, but they're really quite impressive at occasions. You have to come in your formal dress. You might have heard of sub-bus, or you may have seen photographs of Oxford University students graduating or at ceremonies in these beautiful long black gowns with sort of a tuxedo for gentlemen and a white cravat and a lace tie for ladies. You come along for a formal dinner. Normally 3, sometimes 5 courses. Everybody's got 4 glasses of red wine, white wine, champagne and port. No phones to be allowed. They replace all the lamps with candles a lot of the time. I mean, it's a really quite an impressive event. And the first time that you come to one of these, yeah, there's just something really impressive about it. You just get the feeling that you are enjoying exactly the same experience as all of the other students have done at your college over the course of, God knows how many hundreds of years. There's something really quite humbling about that, I think. So really quite impressive. one problem with eating in a dining hall like this for every meal, every day of your first year is that everybody gets really quite fat, as you might imagine. Everybody puts on a lot of weight. The food is really quite, I mean, it's not that it's unhealthy, but invariably when the chefs are cooking meals for 100, 150 people each time, they're not particularly healthy. They're quite stodgy, I guess you could say. And so while it's great fun, obviously, you do look a little worse for wear at the end of your time in your first year. But that's about it when it comes to dining halls. Yeah, I mean, it's funny how quickly the novelty wears off, I suppose. The first time you sit down on one of these things, it's just and then very quickly it becomes very, very normal. And you're just focusing on your toast and beans and what you've got to get up to shortly days thereafter. Yeah. Anyway guys, we are going to head back outside now and down to where we were just standing. There's some interesting architecture in there that just doesn't seem to quite fit in with what you would typically expect of the University of Oxford. There is a reason for why this stuff is stained the landscape. See this white chalk, there's quite a bit of it, there's some over here as well. As I'm sure you're probably all aware, rowing at Oxford is sacrosanct. It's an incredibly important subject. Over the vast majority of Oxford's history, religion has really been in fact for most of its history, the only subject that's been discussed or taught here at Oxford. In more recent times, rowing has sort of overtaken religion as being the thing that everybody has to care about, really. And even if you don't care about it, you have to pretend to care about it. It's really important here at Oxford. Lots of rivalries between the colleges, of course. There are 37 college boat clubs, and a regatta that would allow each of these clubs to even offer just one boat would require an enormous, huge stretch of river. More likely a purpose-built rowing facility, which we just don't have here. And so back in the early 19th century, they came up with a new game which they called bumps. And the idea with bumps is quite simple, really. It takes place every year, typically in the first week of May. And what it involves is down at the River Thames, about a 15-minute walk from here. Each of the crews will line up, each of the college crews will line up with their boats on the bank of the river, 5 metres between the tail of one boat and the head of the next. Of course, there are various different crews that the colleges have. Men and ladies each have two or three boats, so this takes place over an entire week. But suffice to say, the crews get in, everybody's ready, somebody blows a whistle, the race begins, and the aim of the game is to bump the boat in front of you without getting bumped by the boat behind, essentially. Then you have one race each day during this week, so 5 races in total, and if you bump the boat in front of you, on the next race you move up in the rankings. If you get bumped, then you move down one, and at the end of the 5 days you'll have a new order of rankings which continues into the next year. So generally, if you are successful in bumping 3 boats or more, it's considered to be a pretty successful year, and the crews will come and chalk up somewhere in the college. So most of the colleges that you walk around, somewhere you'll see some chalk still lingering. Now, I mean, we can see 2007, for example, here the women's age bumped a few boats. Buildings are much older, but the chalk's been here for quite a long time. They take months and months putting it up, just caking on layer after layer after layer. There's only one college that you go into and see coloured chalk, and it's nothing to do with Balliol actually, but it's a really interesting story. This is New College, which I would recommend you visit later on. It's free from 2 till 4. It's a stunning college, one of the oldest in the city as well, confusingly. Got another Harry Potter film, so it's just a great place to go and check out. And if you were to go in there, you'll see that their chalk features this bright purple and gold. Now, New College are the only college rowers that don't row in their college colours. So the New College colours are black and white, but yet the rowers row in purple and gold. And the reason for this dates back to the Olympics in Stockholm in 1912. So back in that year, there were 2 great British rowing teams. One of them was made up exclusively of rowers from New College. The other was made up of rowers from around the country, and there's a club called the Leander Rowing Club, just from all over the place really. But these 2 guys were both favourites for the gold, and they started off in different pools at the start of the competition. Over the course of the competition, they came to meet in the final. Now, they tossed a coin to determine who would get to choose the best lane. And as they tossed the coin, the New College team won the toss. Now, English courtesy from back in those days dictated that if you were to win an arbitrary 50-50 like that, you would offer the choice to your opponent, who would then very graciously refuse it and give it back to you, and that was just the way that silly courtesy worked back in those days. So the New College team did just that. They offered the choice to the Leander Boat Club, who very happily accepted their kind offer and chose the best lane. Shortly thereafter, they won the gold, and the New College team walked away with the silver. Very disappointed, as you might imagine. Fortunately for the New College rowers, the Swedish royal family were actually there. They were watching this event take place, and they were so surprised, so disappointed, having heard about the customs of British courtesy. They were so surprised to see this that they went and consoled the New College team and actually offered to fund their boat club in perpetuity. And so now the New College rowers race in the purple and gold of the Swedish royal family, as opposed to the black and white of their college, which is pretty cool. So, so talking earlier about associations between colleges and subjects, when it comes down to which college you'd like to go to, generally speaking, the subject that you want to study doesn't play a particularly large role. Of course, there are some colleges that don't, with each offering about 20 subjects, some colleges don't offer the subject at all. It may come down to perhaps, you know, there's a particular professor that you've met in the past, perhaps maybe you've read some of their work, you have a particular association with them, you'd like to study with them, that might be one reason. But generally speaking, it doesn't have too much of a bearing as to which college you would choose. More to the point are things like, if you are a rower, you would probably want to go and study at New College, because therefore you're going to have access to the best rowing grounds. If you are a particular fan of history, perhaps studying Balliol might be a nice idea, with it being the oldest college. If you, if you come and visit the colleges, some of them are enormous, have these big expansive grounds. Christchurch, for example, occupies about a fifth of the city centre. There are others which are much newer, much more modern, have much more comfortable accommodation, better learning facilities, that sort of a thing. So there's various factors that will determine which college you want to go for, but actually the subject that you want to study really doesn't have much of a bearing. Now, I'm going to quickly mention this accommodation, but we've been standing there for a while. Let's quickly walk down this way. I'm going to quickly tell you as to why there is so much room in 20th century slot. So very quickly, as you walk around Oxford, you see broadly two different styles of architecture. You see the old historic Gothic style in particular, and then you see a lot of this sort of mid-20th century concrete square, grim. Some people might like it actually, but I personally think it looks awful. The reason for this is simply due to the fact that for most of Oxford's history, the applications process was based less on your academic rigour and more on your family, really, on the money that you had, the connections that you had, and that sort of thing. As a consequence, the number of eligible students at the university was always quite small, and so the student body was always pretty consistently small. Of course, the university has been consistently growing over the course of its history, new colleges coming in, that sort of thing, but the student body has always been pretty regular. 1960s, well, really in the aftermath of the Second World War, but particularly in the 60s, this all changes. And all of a sudden, as the university is open to far more students, and invariably the student body of the place explodes. All of a sudden, admissions become based on talent and your grades and that sort of thing. All of a sudden, so many more people are eligible for it. The student body of the university explodes, and as a consequence, there was just this desperate need for more facilities, more accommodation in particular. Now, of course, at the time, they turned to the most forward-thinking architects of the day, and what they were offered was this sort of stuff. Now, there are some particularly architects who come to Oxford and they love it. They love the details on these sort of buildings. Personally, I just don't get it at all. I've not really ever studied architecture, and I don't quite understand how you could like it. But as a consequence, you see a lot of this as you walk around Oxford. It's to some people's tastes, but at the time they thought it was going to look good for many centuries to come. I personally don't think that it does, but that's the excuse that we have as to why you see it. Now guys, we're going to head back onto Broad Street and go check out some of the central buildings of the university. We've got the theatre. It used to have beautiful staircases, not for a long time, but the Trinity students smashed it so regularly that they actually just replaced it with perspex, and there's a metal grille on the far side as well. Which is a real shame, to be honest, but it's not, it adds to the intensity of the rivalry between these colleges. So as I mentioned, religion used to be of such importance here at Oxford. Nowadays, not so much. I mean, there are daily services that are entirely optional for students to come along to. Typically, not many people do come. There are a few colleges that have daily evening songs. So some of the larger chapels in cathedrals, well, Christchurch has a cathedral you may be aware of. There are a few of them that offer these big formal services every day. Bailey is not one of those. So this is really more useful for students of the university, the students of the college specifically, rather than any external guests or visitors. So it's a little, I hate to use the word plain, but a little plainer than some of the other chapels and colleges, and certainly the cathedral, in Christchurch. Anyway,
Do they have services or they come here on their own?
No, so they do have to. So everything been? Great. Well, there is this incredible museum just at the top of the road here on the right. The Ashmolean is essentially the University of Oxford Museum, really. It's this enormous complex, it's palatial, just this beautiful building. You could comfortably spend many hours, at least a day in there, really, to do it justice. For most of its history, this building here was the Ashmolean Museum, as it was once known. It was set up by a guy called Elias Ashmole, who had been a student here, and in his later life, he was quite a wealthy man. He'd been on trips all around the world, really. He'd amassed this enormous collection of interesting artefacts, essentially. And he had the pretty forward-thinking idea of opening what was essentially a public space to put on display these things that we collected, allowing people to just come and wander in and have a look, really. Now, museums, of course, as we know them now, but nowadays just didn't really exist back in the 17th century. And so this is considered to have been the first purpose-built museum anywhere in the world, and the oldest purpose-built museum as a consequence. The reason I mention it really is just to, if you've heard of the Ashmolean, but for the rest of you, just to introduce you to the museums of Oxford, because there is some amazing stuff to see. They're all free to go into, these museums. You've got the old Ashmolean, now the Museum of the History of Science here, as I say, new Ashmolean up the top of the road. If you come here and turn left at the King's Arms pub, that pink building there, walk about 10 minutes, you come to the Natural History Museum and Pitt Rivers Museums. Natural History Museum, pretty obvious. Pitt Rivers is anthropology. You might remember those little shrunken heads on the night bus in the Harry Potter films, you might remember them. They are real, as it happens, and they're up at the Pitt Rivers Museum. It's an example of some of the dark stuff that you can see in there. If you were to wander in here, open from midday this one, and down into the basement, you would see a chalkboard that was used by Albert Einstein. Great, let's go by it. Yeah, chalkboard used by Albert Einstein back in 1931. He was over at Rhodes House giving a series of lectures, and at the end of the lectures, they took his chalkboard off the wall and framed it and put it on the wall in here. And to this day, you can go and see his schoolings and workings out and stuff, which is pretty nuts, I've got to say. I mean, I don't know if any of you have ever studied theoretical physics. I certainly have not, so I haven't got a bloody clue what it says, but it's great to see nonetheless. Yeah, it's well worth checking out, so I'd certainly recommend it. So not many of you heard of the Ashmolean. How about Blackwell's bookshop over here? Very famous bookshop, yes. Great. Now, a lot of people have heard of it, a lot of people haven't heard of Blackwell's. Those who have are well aware of really what this place is. Really famous and really important, actually, in the history of Oxford. Mainly due to the fact that the Bodleian Library, which we're going to go and see later, is a presence library, which essentially means, still to this day, and ever since it was founded, you're not allowed to take any of the books outside of the grounds of the library. Hugely impractical for students, of course. A guy called Henry Blackwell, back in the 1870s, decided to open a bookshop and sell all these books that the students needed to them. Made a huge amount of money, of course. Blackwell's initially was a tiny bookshop, occupying just a small corner of where the White Horse sits at the moment. Nowadays, it's enormous. It looks much bigger. It is much bigger than it looks, excuse me. People come from all over the place to visit it, and once you walk in, you'll be able to see why. There's 5 stories of it in total. The basement is a single room. It's called the Norrington Room. Have you guys been to see it yet? No. Okay, well, I'm sure. I would recommend that you all do. The basement, a single room, the Norrington Room, once had the Guinness World Record for being the single largest room in a bookshop in the world. Now, the wording of that sounds like it's a little bit of a cop-out. I know, but it's amazing, this room. There was at one point 180,000 books in this single room alone. It's just a really impressive place to go and check out, and I would highly recommend you go and have a little look later. For now, though, we're going to head through this gate over here to the Sheldonian. Just bear in mind as we walk in, all of these buildings. If you do go to the Ashmolean later, this doorway might seem familiar. This was the original entrance to the museum, and it was this that the new one has been modelled on, essentially. So try and take a sort of mental snapshot if you go and visit the new one later. I just want to check, is anybody born on the 22nd of June? No. I swear to God, I've never met anybody born on the 22nd of June, but one day it's going to look good. There's just, sorry, what's really nice here, as you can see, a lot of the stone in Oxford has been meticulously maintained, Sheldonian being a good example of that. Some of it hasn't been, and where it hasn't been, you see a lot of graffiti that's been etched on and scribbled in over the years. The closer you look, the wall starts to illuminate with these letters and numbers. And there's one bit here, a guy called Simpson carved this in the 22nd of June 1734. Which I just find nuts. And as I say, the closer you look, the more you start to see. So as you walk around Oxford, it is just worth keeping your eyes peeled for this graffiti. That Queen Anne. You might have seen, though, there's Mary Queen of Scots, new one with Margot Robbie, you might have seen. They both really quite heavily featured the Divinity School in Convocation Clashes. So if you see those films, it's me at some point. It seemed familiar. Now, we are going to be going into Divinity School at some point soon. They have just started trialling this new system whereby people aren't allowed to talk inside of the room. So normally what I'd say was a bit of an introduction, then we go in and see it. If we can't talk inside, I'm just going to tell you some information here. I'll tell you a bit more before we go in, and then we're going to be pretty quiet inside, and otherwise we'll invoke the wrath of the bodily and lively staff, and they can be quite fearsome, I must say. So the Divinity School here, the construction was started in 1427. The exterior was finished in that year, actually, but the place didn't open until 1488. It took an awful long time to get it finished, and that was simply due to the ceiling inside this room. You can just about get well, maybe you can just about see a little bit of it from here. Of course, you can get a much better view in a few minutes' time. The ceiling took them, just over 60 years to get it finished. I mean, it's an unbelievably detailed, fan-vaulted ceiling. You know how it's fan-vaulted architecture. There are 455 crests of various families, institutions through the colleges as well, that donated to get the place finished, essentially, at an enormous expense. Fascinating place. Now, when it was finally completed in 1488, it was considered to have been the first purpose-built classroom of the University of Oxford. And as such, it housed lectures and, lectures in particular, but exams, most importantly. All of the university exams were sat inside the Divinity School at that time. Exams in the 15th century at the University of Oxford, unsurprisingly, not much fun at all. They could last a long time. I'd be interested to know, actually, what's the longest exam any of you guys have had to suffer through? 4 hours? That seems pretty standard for nowadays, eh? Minimum exams back in the 1480s would have been 6 hours. However, they went on into the double digits pretty regularly, even up to 25, 26 hours at a time, these exams. Huge sort of variation in how long students might be expected to stay. Various reasons as to why that was, but one interesting one is that actually the wealth of the student had quite a lot to do with how long they'd be forced to stand and argue their ideas. Of course, back in those days, all of the students were from wealthy families, or at least had wealthy sponsors. But if those students had personally had enough cash to provide their tutor with a bit of a bonus at the start of the exam, more than likely it wouldn't be the most arduous of mornings or afternoons for them. If they couldn't afford such a luxury, then probably a sleepless night or two in the Divinity School. Now, these exams, there was no writing involved. It was just an oral, verbal debate between one student and a team of tutors. It was all done in Latin as well. Latin was the only language used at Oxford until the end of the 16th century, actually. So for mathematically, most of the university's history, you had to speak Latin to come to study here at Oxford. Probably the most surprising, most distressing thing about these exams is that a surprisingly small amount of the room, really from around about here onwards, it's just over a third of the room, set aside. It's where the pulpits are, these sort of wooden stands where the students and tutors would have stood. The exams would take place. The majority of the room is open space. There's benches lining it nowadays. Used to be set aside for spectators. And such was the state of live entertainment back in the 15th century, that if you were bored and needed entertaining, exams in Latin for hours and hours on end were was quite a privilege, really. there weren't many choices. There was exams in Latin. We had a bear pit, actually, back in those days, so you could go and watch animals fighting to the death, if you'd rather, but not much of a choice, unfortunately. So nowadays, the Divinity School, it doesn't really get used by the university that much, surprisingly. It's such a stunning historical building. It's open to visitors most of the time, actually. Film producers, as I say, they cannot get enough of the space. It was featured in 3 of the Harry Potter films. It was closed off last week, actually, for filming. We don't know what they were filming, but they're always something. It's used by the university for doctoral degree ceremonies. And so the actual ceremony takes place in the Sheldonian, which we'll come to in a moment. They have a robing ceremony prior to the graduation ceremony. Now, quite simply, it's not really much of a ceremony, actually. Everyone just goes in, puts on their, particularly for DPhil graduates or graduates at that point, they're pretty impressive graduation gowns. Everybody has a little flute of champagne and just congratulates one another on a job well done. Then one by one, these soon-to-be graduates will head out of these wooden doors here. Of course, this square here is filled with the friends and family of these students who are about to graduate, and they walk out one by one to the applause of the spectators. And one by one, they take a moment to look up at that book you can just see in the alcove up there. In fact, we might as well go and have a look. Anyone speak ancient Greek? A little bit, hey! Well, listen, why don't you come and give it a go? It's not very often you get to exercise talent in ancient Greek, eh? No shame. If you guys did. Very brave of you to give it a go.
I don't know.
Well, it says, well, it's a quote from the New Testament. That story with where Jesus was lost as a young child and found in the temple amongst the scholars. It simply says, for he was found amongst the teachers. And the idea here, much as so, Divinity School developed over the course of the 15th century. Christopher Wren came in to design the Sheldonian, and it was in the late 1660s that he installed this wall here. At the time, the book was thought to be decorative, really, but the purpose it has nowadays is students take soon to be sort of masters of their subjects. You know, they take this one moment to pause and reflect on what they're about to achieve before they go and graduate to this pretty impressive looking theatre behind you. So the Sheldonian Theatre. Now this place, new as it looks, was actually completed in 1668. Opened in 1669. The story of it dates back to almost a decade before that, actually. The University of Oxford, really in the 1650s, wanted to develop a facility that was specifically for ceremonies, graduation ceremonies in particular, but just university ceremonies. And the Vice-Chancellor of the university from 1661, I believe it was a man called Gilbert Sheldon. Now this guy was the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Oxford. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury. He was enormously wealthy, very powerful. And when he heard that the university wanted funding to develop such a facility, he actually offered to fund almost the entire project by himself. Now, what that essentially gave him was a bit of creative reign, and he had quite a specific taste, Mr. Sheldon. And what he wanted was a theatre that could seat, the number that was quoted was 1,500 people. Now, bearing in mind, if you think of large theatres over the course of history, you typically think of places with sunny, warm weather. You think of like the Romans, the ancient Greeks, for example. But essentially areas that you could afford to have an open-air theatre. Not possible in a country like England, of course, as much as it's a lovely, well, it looks like a lovely day today. It's normally raining and grey and cold here. And so importantly, this theatre needed to have a roof, ceiling, to keep the weather out. Now, architectural technology back in the 1660s only really afforded two options when it came to a roof of this size, a roof of this weight more particularly. One of those options was to have a big Gothic dome, to spread the weight of the roof out to the external walls. It was thought that that would just look silly on a building of this size. Now, the alternative was to have interior sort of central structural support, i.e. a column, a pillar or a series of columns to support the weight of the roof. Of course, in many buildings that would be fine. In a theatre, that's going to obstruct the views of some of the people sitting in the audience. That simply wasn't good enough, it was thought, for the University of Oxford. And so Mr. Sheldon went to Mr. Christopher Wren. Of course, he happened to be alive at the same time as one of the most talented architects of all time, and he just went and said, just make it happen, really. We want a theatre that can seat all these number of people without a dome and without any interior central structural support. Now, Christopher Wren was commissioned this project in 1665. Of course, Great Fire of London 1666. He was a very busy man in that year, and indeed the year afterwards. But it was in 1668 that this place was finally finished. It's impossible to know exactly how long it took Christopher Wren to design the ceiling here, but of course it would have taken a long time, because when this place was constructed, it boasted the largest unsupported flat ceiling that had ever been constructed. And I mean, if you think of some of the incredible architectural achievements of the human race prior to the 1660s, it's just amazing to think this was really first of its kind. You know, it was a marvel of modern architecture at the time. The way he did it was with a very complex network of wooden trusses, essentially, that occupied the attic. It's only about 1.5 metres high. It was a really, really impressive design. And if you walk around the corner here, you'll get a bit of a better idea of the size of it, I suppose. So now, as an Oxford student, you will typically have two ceremonies here at the Sheldonian. You have your matriculation, which is like officially your first day at the university, and then your graduation at the end of your studies as well. And regardless of what subject you study, which college you study at, any factors like that, you will always matriculate and graduate here at the Sheldonian. The only proviso to that is that Balliol students and Merton College students never matriculate or graduate on the same day. By tradition, the dean, the principal of the oldest college, is the one to read out the graduation script. And because Merton and Balliol can't agree on who's older, the two students just graduate on different days, essentially. A bit silly, but it works. It keeps them all happy. So yeah, the Sheldonian is a pretty impressive place. Now I think we might mention it again as we walk around the corner here, when you get a view of its side profile. Okay, I'm sure we've all heard of Venice. Well, if you get a chance to go, I would highly recommend it, particularly when you're this side of the world. Beautiful place, Venice. Now, I'm sure we all know what I'm talking about. The flooded city, quite uniquely built in the sea. And there are some very nice bridges in Venice that, of course, deal with the obvious consequences of it being constantly and entirely flooded. There's one bridge in particular that has spawned copycats all over the world. It's captured the imaginations of people. This is the Bridge of Sighs.
The Bridge of Sighs
Now there is.
Size because
I just move us a little bit down here.
So inmates crossing the bridge.
So yeah, the Bridge of Sighs in Venice. Now, as you may or may not know, the Bridge of Sighs was named after a bit of a legend. Well, everybody's talking about the bloody Bridge of Sighs. See how popular this bridge is, ladies and gentlemen. So the Bridge of Sighs in Venice was so named because it used to connect the courthouse with the jail of the city. So you're a bit cold. You want to come out? Oh, yeah, okay. It used to connect the courthouse with the jail, and the idea was that prisoners in the courthouse would be, handed their sentences, told exactly how many years they're going to go and spend in some horrendous Venetian prison cell, and then they cross this bridge on their way to that prison. So they have this final opportunity to essentially look outside, see the sky and the sun, and God knows what else. The idea being that they release a sigh as they cross the bridge, quite upset as they would be. Great story behind the name of the bridge. The Venetian Bridge of Sighs, though, is just aesthetically, it's just not that interesting, really. There is another one just up the canal from it, called the Rialto Bridge, Ponte Rialto, which much more interesting bridge, just named after its architecture. So the people here at Oxford thought that was, interesting looking bridge, not as interesting of a name. So what they decided to do quite cunningly was take the best elements of each of these two disconnected bridges. And so they took the design of the Rialto Bridge, shrunk it down a little bit, name of the Bridge of Sighs, and slapped it on top, and came up with this guy. Good job done. Now this bridge connects two halls of Hertford College, again one of the oldest colleges in the city, 1286 Hertford was founded. Ironically though, this bridge just doesn't get used that much. It's all a bit embarrassing actually. The reason we built it was because Cambridge University built one first. Have you been to Cambridge by any chance? You've seen the Cambridge Bridge of Sighs. Well, you might. It's quite hard to get to actually, but there is a Bridge of Sighs in Cambridge. They built theirs back over the course of the 1860s, and we like to pretend ours is better. The Cambridge one is just definitely nicer, really, in every way. It crosses a river, for example, which makes it look nicer. It also gets used much more often. It's in a very sunny part of the city, and due to the bearing of this bridge, it just is often in shade, so it looks a bit dark and dirty. Cambridge one has this beautiful golden glow to it, almost correctly. There's a tree next to it. Just a great bridge. Just a great bridge. Now, there is a bit of a myth in the city to suggest that our bridge is 3 inches longer than the one in Cambridge. The reason being that it's important for us to have a little something to cling on to. As it happens, that is complete nonsense. The Cambridge one is just better and bigger and nicer looking. As I say, we need something to say because this bridge, as you can tell by the rather loud American beneath it, the bridge is just really not necessary at all. Because of course it's very easy to walk across this quiet paved street. Normally you need a bridge to cross an obstacle of some sort, and there is just an obstacle here. Apart from that, in the summer actually, yeah, you might imagine this is on a cold Wednesday in January. If you imagine this place in July, it's like a river of tourists you can imagine. But generally speaking, not necessary at all. But it does look very pretty, and depending on who you are, it's slightly better than what it came to. Now, one thing I would want your attention to is just beneath the bridge. You see the gap between the red brick and yellow stone building? See the side passage? Now, has anyone been down there by any chance? Ever heard of it? No? Well, you'd be forgiven for thinking that it wouldn't be worth your while going down to explore this passage because it looks pretty dangerous, looks pretty shady. For most of its history, it's been very dangerous actually. It's known as St. Helens Passage and colloquially known as Helm's Passage. Lots of people have been actually killed down there. It used to be where the ladies of the night would linger and collect their customers. But if you were to walk down there, you would eventually come to the second oldest pub in Oxford. It's called the Turf Tavern. It opened since at least the 1380s. They claim 10th century, but there's no evidence for that at all as it happened. But really impressive old pub this. I'd highly recommend you go and check it out later if you get a chance. It's, unsurprisingly, having been here for a long time, there's a few interesting things have happened at the pub. Old US President Bill Clinton was here as a Rhodes Scholar back in the 1970s. I think it was 1973 he was here. And we have a bit of what we like to think in Oxford is that it was down at the Turf Tavern that Mr. Clinton began his well-known habit of doing things that he shouldn't have done. Now this one came back to bite him years later. I believe it was in his second presidential campaign when he was accused of smoking cannabis during his time here as a young student. I know. A shocking revelation. Now Mr. Clinton, as you may remember, he admitted that he had smoked it, but that he had inhaled it. And with his his charisma and his knack for getting away with things, really. That was very quickly forgotten. And thankfully so, there was another world leader, and the old Australian Prime Minister, guy called Bob Hawke, was also a Rhodes Scholar in the late 60s. And it was down there that he set a world record for drinking a yard of ale. Now, a yard of ale, you may have seen these massive yard glasses. It looks more like a vase, really, with this big glass orb at the bottom. Contains, I don't know, but I think about 3.5 pints of beer. I mean, it's a lot of beer. Bob Hawke drank one of those in under 11 seconds. So, I mean, a remarkable achievement. Set the world record, as I say, at the time. Stunning achievement by the man, and of course, a career in politics was awaiting down in the great land down under. Really impressive pub, though. I highly recommend you go check it out later if you get a chance. Nice food, just a great place to sit, really. The camera. No, I suspect if you've not seen this building in real life, you'll have seen photographs of it, or anything to do with Oxford, any book, any website, any poster, anything. You can guarantee it's going to have images of this thing. Cape Flora. Stunning, spectacular landmark, the cap with the right-click camera. It looks as though something really important is actually happening inside it. Surprisingly, there's not a huge amount does, actually. The camera, sorry, I should just mention the word camera. People often think it's something to do with photography, unsurprisingly. Camera essentially translates to an old Latin word, which means a room with a space, essentially, room with a hole. So you might have heard of like a camera obscura, for example. In the early days of optics, they'd have a very dark room with a glass lens that would convert the image over onto the far side of the room. So nothing to do with photography, essentially. But the camera, well, it was built back in 1749. At the time, it was just another library for the students of the university. However, over the course of the past 2.5 centuries, the collection of this library has expanded enormously. Really, the camera is all to do with the Bodleian Library, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about this library here. The Bodleian, we're going to be going in a moment, the central library of the University of Oxford. Ever since it was founded back in 1602, it's been a the reason it was founded was due to the fact that by 1599, the University of Oxford had just 3 books, 3 volumes in its central university library. Reason being, the English Reformation happened, essentially. We'll be talking about this a little later when we actually get into the library. Suffice to say, the collection of books at the university was just diminished enormously. A man called Thomas Bodley, who had been a student at Merton College, had recently married an exceptionally wealthy young lady and decided to donate some of his new wealth to the university to build essentially a sanctuary for a collection of books that he was able to get his hands on. Now, at the time the Bodleian was founded, there were about 1,100 books. By 1610, they'd breached the 2,000 book mark. Would anybody like to guess how many books might now be housed within the Bodleian libraries?
I actually don't know.
Well, anyone feeling brave?
I don't remember.
No. Come on, someone feeling brave, come on. No, okay. Okay, well, so the official count is about 12.5 million. However, they have actually breached the 14 million book mark. And Trevor, one of our guys, is good friends with one of the librarians here, and yeah, 14 million is what they're now at. Reason is predominantly due to the fact that it's a copyrights library. And ever since 1610, Mr. Bodley agreed, essentially came to an agreement with the Stations Company in London, who essentially looked after publishing books in the country at that point. Ever since 1610, just about 1 copy of every book published in England initially, then the United Kingdom, still the United Kingdom, arrives at this library, and they don't have a legal obligation, but they have an interest in storing just about every book that arrives here. And they can still be receiving thousands of books.
Do they have a cafe?
The collection is growing very rapidly. Of course, they've literally run out of space here now. The Western has space for around 5 million books. Many more are stored in Swindon, which is about a 20-minute drive away from here, actually. Just to give you a bit of a point of reference, 14 million just sounds like a very big number. In the entirety of the English Wikipedia, there are just over 5.5 million articles. So I don't know about you guys, I mean, I can't think of many things that don't have an English Wikipedia article. There are, I mean, coming up to 3 times the number of books in this library's collection as there are English Wikipedia articles on the internet. I mean, it's an astonishing collection. In this library alone, there are 117 miles of shelves. If you imagine walking from, from like here to London and back again, just with a bookshelf next to the entire way. I mean, so it's an incredible collection. Now, as I mentioned, President's Library, you're not allowed to take any of the books out. As a consequence, the Radcliffe camera here really serves as an extension of the library, a bit of a reading room, lots of places to sit and study. It's also the library of the history faculty, so most of the university's history will be stored inside here. But beyond that, there's not a huge amount to say about it. One interesting story that does lead me on to is is the reasons as to why Oxford was entirely unaffected in terms of physical damage by either of the world wars, and the Second World War in particular. Of course, the vast majority of large cities in this part of the country were ravaged during the particularly 1939-1942. Oxford, in contrast, not a single bomb was dropped over the city. Still to this day, we don't really know conclusively as to why that was. There are various theories that have been suggested. There's not a huge amount of evidence to go on, really. One pretty popular theory, which has always been kept quite vague, is that Hitler liked Oxford. He really liked Oxford, and he wanted to preserve it so that following the end of the war, this could be converted into some sort of governmental headquarters, some sort of residential palace, something along those lines. Thank you. Another popular theory, if any of you have been to Germany, you may have heard of Heidelberg, the oldest university in Germany. It's the late 14th century. Again, this place was entirely spared from bombing during the war. There was a suggestion that perhaps there had been a secret agreement. It seems like a bizarre anomaly for these two cities to have been preserved, but again, there's not really any evidence for that. There is some evidence to suggest that this building was saved by a man called Albert Speer, who was the chief architect of the Third Reich. And in his memoirs, he escaped execution following the end of the war. He basically pled ignorance, but he was imprisoned in the Spandau prison in West Berlin until his death in, I think, 1982. I think he died. It was in 1975 he published his memoirs. And in his memoirs, he essentially made the claim that Oxford had been preserved in order for the Nazis to occupy it following their inevitable victory in the war. So they had some beautiful old historic city to make their own, turn into their governmental headquarters, something along those lines. We only mentioned two buildings in the centre of Oxford, one of which was Blenheim Palace, which if you've not had a chance to visit, I'd highly recommend. It's the only non-royal property in the country to have been awarded the title of palace. It's birthplace of Winston Churchill, only about 10 miles away from here. It's a stunning place. I would certainly recommend it. The other was the Radcliffe Camera here. And while this is entirely speculative, I must admit, it's quite a scary thought to imagine that had the early 1940s gone slightly differently, and you know, they really weren't far away from a Nazi victory at a number of occasions. You can just imagine all of these buildings by a long way outdate the 20th century, and had the Nazis been victorious, you can just imagine that perhaps the only difference in this square would maybe have been the addition of those big red banners that they dangled off all their buildings. I mean, it's a really harrowing thought, actually, and with that being the case, it's quite convenient and quite fortunate that the Radcliffe Camera actually has a surprisingly mundane purpose in our reality. Now we're going to quickly head down. Unfortunately, we're going to keep following our American friend here. We're going to students. To get into All Souls, you have to be offered a fellowship, essentially. So, a fellowship. So a fellowship, just to clarify, a fellowship, these really vary in terms of the reasons as to why they were given out. They're typically a funded research position that the college can award to somebody that they think is going to use that money wisely. Very often it's the case that it will be a student or an individual that's done something impressive that the college would like to associate itself with, maybe an old student who's gone on to particular success. A bit of a grey area, really, fellowships. And there are a number of fellowships that are on offer here. There's only one that is open to application, so one that is technically open to anyone. It's known as the exam fellowship or the research fellowship. And to get onto this, you do have to have been to one of the other Oxford University colleges first, and you have to have studied a postgraduate degree. Then each year, the top postgraduate students are given an opportunity to apply to come and have a go at the entrance exams here at All Souls. And typically, one or two of the top postgrad students from each of the other colleges will be given this opportunity to come and sit the entrance exam. So normally get around about 80 students. Some of the top postgrad students at the university arrive here for the last weekend in September to take a series of 3 entrance exams. Now, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, a couple of years ago, they had to dump one of these exams due to complaints of its difficulty. And so now they sit these 3 6-hour papers. These 6-hour papers, there are huge choices of questions. There are 8 different subject areas. Within each subject area, there are 120 different questions. And the idea here is not, you know, most exams, they really limit the choice in order to test that you've really you've done your work, done your research. Here, the idea is more to give these guys an opportunity simply to demonstrate how much they know about their particular field of expertise. You know, you've got 6 hours, 1 question, or just about anything. So the idea is you can sit and regurgitate as much as you know about your field of study. I should mention actually that one of these 8 subject areas is known as the general subject area. There are lots of funky questions inside here. And there's one which I will mention. It's a little bit sort of 18 plus. But so the question was, does the does the moral standing of an orgy change if the participants are wearing Nazi uniforms? And the reason I just like that is because you can just imagine the sort of people that are applying for this place. To think that they were sat down and think about that for 6 hours is astonishing, really, but some of them did. Now, up until a few years ago, one of these exams was replaced with a different exam, which was only 3 hours long. You sit down in the hall here, which is just on the south side, the right-hand side of the quad from where we're standing, and on your desk would have been an envelope. Inside the envelope would have been a piece of paper. 3 hours on the clock, you open the envelope, look at the piece of paper, one single word written on it. Just a random word, essentially. You have 3 hours to write an essay on that random word, whatever it was that they'd selected for that particular day. Now, I must admit, these 6 hour papers, they're all published up on the All Souls website. And there is some really interesting stuff to see. I'd certainly recommend you take a look if you get a chance. Long car journeys and that sort of thing, it's always interesting to have a bit of a chat. Have you got a couple of those to look forward to, perhaps? Well, there you go. Yeah, I wouldn't look in the general section, maybe, but certainly worth a look. The one-word exam, as it's known, has never been published officially. But some of these words get out through word of mouth, of course. So the ones that we know of, in 2011, the word was bias. 2009, it was said to have been water. There was one year, I think 2008 or 2007, was coconut. And supposedly in 2006, it was just the letter C. Actually, not even a full word, just a little letter for you to digest. And bearing in mind, of course, that these are some of the top postgrad students at the University of Oxford, some of the brightest minds out there, and you have to stand out from the crowd writing about coconuts, for example. I mean, it's a tricky thing to do. Now, of the 80 or so people that take these exams, typically only 2 are invited for interviews. So if you come third out of this incredibly impressive pool of people, you know, a marvellous achievement by most standards, just not good enough for all sorts, unfortunately. But if you come in the top 2, you go for your interview. Grueling process, of course, and then each year it depends. They'll either accept, well, sometimes they won't accept anybody, sometimes one, sometimes both of the applicants. And at that point, you will be invited to a dinner. Sorry, I should say after the interview, if the interview is successful, you'll be invited to a dinner. You're still not told explicitly that you're in, nor are you told explicitly that you're out if you're not invited to the dinner. Tradition dictates that if you're invited to the dinner, you don't go, because people are a bit worried. At the dinner, you're just formally announced as a new fellow, but people are a bit concerned that they might embarrass themselves, get a bit drunk, you know, somehow ruin their chance, and so they just don't go to the dinner, and they're announced in this, then that's just the way it sort of works. But you're probably wondering, why bother? Why would you bother jumping through these ridiculous hoops in order to get into All Souls? Once you're in, you are entitled to a pretty sweet list of benefits. So these fellowships are marketed as being 7 years in length, but typically it seems to be the case that if you are awarded a fellowship, once you get in, you tend to stay in, really. So for the duration of your time here, you get an office and accommodation within the grounds of the college, which is very prestigious, one of the most prestigious addresses, though of course most people have not heard about it, but in the upper echelons of academia, this is the place to be, really. You get given a cash stipend every month of £1,432, excuse me, 1432 being the year that they traced their founding back to. Yeah, you got to be careful, you got to be careful. And in addition to that, you get unlimited research funding. So whatever you want to go off and study, whatever you want to go off and research, if you can justify it, then All Souls will give you all the money that you need to go off and do it. To give you an idea, the endowment of this place is in the region of £290 million. Total number of fellows at any one time never reaches 100. It's a really small population of themselves. The joke, that's not really even a joke, it seems to be pretty accurate, is that the death rate and the acceptance rate seem to be crudely similar. And so as a consequence, there are very rarely any jumps in terms of the population of the place. But interestingly, once you get in, regardless of which fellowship you get onto, once you get in, bear in mind, you will always have studied a degree at one of the other colleges at Oxford. And so, more than likely, you spent many years in this city already. There's a place just a short walk away, a stone's throw away, that you have spent many years. You've made your friends. You've probably got accommodation. You may well be a fellow there as well. You've got a home in the city already. Also, quite unusually, there are no lectures, there are no seminars, there's actually really no reason to be here at all. And of course, when you're being given, it's bizarre. And in fact, if you stand by the gate, you do occasionally see a couple of people walking around, but in comparison to any of the other colleges, they're just very dead and quiet. There's only one occasion to which the fellows are all obliged to come back, and it happens pretty infrequently, but they all arrive back here in All Souls. It happens once every century, actually, once every 100 years, on the 2nd of January, on the 01 year of each new century. Sorry, 14th of January, on the 01 year of each new century. They will all congregate here and they take part in what is known as the Mallard Hunt, which essentially involves them hunting for an imaginary duck, getting very drunk, running around with torches and pitchforks and this sort of thing, trying to find this duck. It takes a long time, this party, a big boozy banquet followed by a lot of drinking and hunting for this duck, singing the Mallard song. One of the fellows is launched up onto a chair and dangled around, and he's holding his stick with some string and a wooden duck hanging off the end. Weird party this. As I say, it doesn't happen very often, and I suspect it will be long gone by the time it next happens. But what typically happens, these guys will be searching for this imaginary duck until about 3 or 4 in the morning. Of course, they don't find it. When they're done with the party, they come down to this gate here. Radcliffe Square is just filled with spectators coming to watch this ridiculous event. And the warden of the college, as he's known here, the principal essentially, will come out of the gate, all the fellows behind him, it's always been him coincidentally, with his hand behind his back. He pulls it out and will have a spear. And impaled on the top of the spear will be a recently deceased mallard duck. And he launches it into the air and announces, like, huzzah, we found him! And everybody in the square erupts into applause and cheering, and then the fellows head back in, the gates close, everyone goes home, and that's it for another 100 years, yeah. It's a bit of a weird one, but yeah, not very often that these guys will get together and have a good party, so it should be a good one, I suppose. But that's All Souls College for you, yeah, a bit of a weird place. Right. So I all of a sudden had a chance to take some time off in April, and so I just looked at a few flights and got a flight to Buenos Aires for 4 quick return flight. And it was just, I booked it and went 2 days later. So I didn't think about the fact that the seasons are inverted down in the southern hemisphere. So I was thinking great sunny summer weather. So I rocked up in the airport in my shorts and t-shirt. It was like this actually. It wasn't quite as cold, but it was raining. It was great. It was not quite as cold as this, but it wasn't the summer that I was in the square. The story of this place is really interesting actually. As I say, founded in 1602 and funded by a guy called Thomas Bodley. This guy decided to donate when he learned that the collection of the library was only capped at 3 books. Now, to quickly cover the English Reformation, I suspect we've probably studied this to some degree at school, a really important period in terms of all of English history really, but particularly in Oxford. Turn of the 16th century, you've got King Henry VIII on the throne of England, and he's married to the Spanish princess Catherine of Aragon. Now, for various reasons, Henry wants to divorce Catherine of Aragon, predominantly due to the fact that the two of them have been unable to produce a son. Henry simply needs a son to be his heir when he dies. Henry ultimately had a bit of a taste for divorces, I suppose, or at least new weddings, and this was the first. Now, to get a divorce in England back in those days was exceptionally difficult, really. You had to get permission from the Pope, and to get permission from the Pope, you had to have an exceptionally good reason. Now, Henry argued that Catherine of Aragon had initially been married to his older brother Arthur. And the argument was that had the marriage between those two been consummated, then his marriage to her should never have been confirmed. In the first place, Catherine of Aragon maintained that the marriage had never been consummated, and as a consequence, the Pope agreed with Catherine of Aragon. There's some politics involved there as well. Long story short, Henry is stuck married to this Spanish princess. And he is, really quite a long story short, he just essentially changes the religion of the country from Roman Catholicism to Anglicanism to Protestantism. Sets up the Church of England, changes the religion of the country, as I say, and now as the new head of the State Church of England, it's his decision who he does or does not divorce. He divorces Catherine of Aragon, marries his sweetheart Anne Boleyn, and I suspect we probably all know the story from there. Now, the reason this period is important is due to one of the side effects of the religion of the country changing, which now meant that a lot of the books that existed in the country were heretical. If you can imagine, the vast majority of books back in those days had been, when I say vast majority, I mean the vast majority had been handwritten by scribes and monks around the country, around the continent. You might have heard of the Gothenburg Press, which had been around since the mid-14th century, producing Bibles almost exclusively. So most texts had been written by hand. And most of them as well involved religion in some sort, as you might imagine, written at a time when England was Catholic, as most of the continent was Catholic. Most of these books contained Catholic principles, suffice to say. All of a sudden, Henry wants to divorce his wife, changes the religion of the country to do so. Now these books are no longer in line with the religious beliefs of the monarch. And if you're found to own one of these books, you can be found guilty of heresy, and if you're found guilty of heresy, you will be killed. probably in one of two ways. You'll either be burned to life at the stake, as many heretics actually were in Oxford, or you'll be hanged, drawn, and quartered. Which people from outside of England have often not heard of this particularly grisly method of execution. I would recommend that you Google it if you'd like to, because it's pretty, I mean, it's sort of perversely fascinating, but I won't go into it in any more detail than that. Suffice to say, if you own one of these books, you want to get rid of it. You know, pretty sharpish. Nobody wants to buy them. Easy way to get rid of them is just to destroy them. And so people start destroying books, burning them in particular. People start to mistake this burning of books. Sorry guys, we're going to be going inside in a minute. People start to mistake this burning of books. People start to mistake this burning of books as being more of sort of a broader show of support for Henry VIII. People are just burning books up and down the country. A number of books in the University of Oxford diminishes enormously. Thomas Bodley donates, fills the space, gets a collection of books together, about 1100. 1602 is founded, becomes the central library of the University of Oxford. Okay, we've got to that in 2 minutes. I will just quickly mention, if you look right the way down here, you see two wooden doors through where you were standing a moment ago. I went into the Western Library. Western was built back in opened 1940, completed in 1939. Three massive basement levels beneath the Western, storage of 5 million books. It was in one of those basements that much of the planning of the D-Day landings was done actually as well, so some pretty impressive history there. There is a tunnel that is no longer used from the Western Library here to the Bodleian. Again, if you go on a tour of the Western, they usually don't show it, but if you ask very nicely, they may well do, and they can walk you down here to the Bodleian Library. There is another tunnel called the Gladstone Link. You can see a skylight in the corner here, and another one just over there by the old Natural Philosophy office. The Gladstone Link is enormous, actually. It's much more than a tunnel. It's more of a complex, really, of reading rooms and storage rooms, and that extends over to the Radcliffe Camera. Of course, that's how you get the books from the Bodleian Library over to this lovely reading room. The last thing I would mention is that as you walk in here, you see this big statue, and it would be right to assume that was Thomas Bodley. Sorry, it would be fair to assume that it's Thomas Bodley, wrong to assume it though. The references to Thomas Bodley are pretty few and far between. You can see the drain pipe in that far corner to your left has the initials TB pressed into the wall fixtures. There's also a stone engraving at the top amongst the grotesques at the top of the drain pipe, just to the left by 3 or 4. The statue is actually of a man called William Herbert, who was the Vice Chancellor of the University in the 1630s. It had nothing to do with the development of the library, actually. He was so impressed with it that at his own expense he put a statue of himself right by the main entrance. Interesting chap, Mr. William Herbert. Anyway guys, let's head into the Divinity School. As I say, we really can't talk much inside. Have you got any questions? Do you mind getting a quick photo? For our budget marketing campaign.